They picked the emptiest place on Earth. No roads, no towns, no signal, 1 million acres of water, stone, and pine. The Verne Ascendancy landed in the boundary waters and called it undefended. They survived the wolves, they survived the cold, they did not survive what came next. If you enjoy stories where humanity does not win with weapons, but with patience, paperwork, and one very stubborn animal, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves a good survival story. And when you reach the end, drop a comment and tell me the exact moment you started rooting for the Wolverine. Now, grab your paddle. Let us move forward into the deep water, where the maps end and the trouble begins. The Verne Ascendancy did not choose Earth for its beauty. They chose it the way a contractor chooses a vacant lot. High Marshal Cordon Vresk stood on the command deck of the warship Unbroken Mandate, 300 miles above the Northern Hemisphere, reading a survey report that had taken 11 months to compile. He was a careful officer. He had conquered 4 worlds without ever losing a supply column, and he believed, deeply and sincerely, that wars were won by logistics and lost by excitement. "Sub-analyst Peth," he said, "read me the landing recommendation again." Peth adjusted the console readout. Peth was thin, nervous, and extremely good at his job, which meant he spent most of his career delivering accurate information to people who did not want it. "Site designation Northern Shield," Peth said. "Population density effectively 0. Permanent structures none. Paved surfaces none. Military installations none. Communication infrastructure none. Industrial capacity none. Sir, by every measurement we use, it is the softest ground on this planet." Vresk nodded slowly. "And the terrain?" "Flat," Peth said. He would think about that answer for the rest of his life. The place they had chosen had a human name: the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Northern Minnesota, pressed against the Canadian border, sitting on top of some of the oldest exposed bedrock on the planet. Over 1 million acres, more than 1,000 lakes. Granite scraped bare by glaciers, then covered in a thin skin of soil, jack pine, black spruce, birch, and moss. No roads inside it, no motors in most of it, no cell towers. If you wanted to travel through it, you paddled a canoe across the water, and then you picked that canoe up, put it on your shoulders, and carried it overland to the next lake. The humans called that a portage. They had been doing it for thousands of years. The Verne survey had recorded the lakes as flat terrain. On a scan from orbit, water and stone look remarkably similar. That single error was about to cost an empire its dignity. The landing happened at 9 minutes past 4 in the morning, local time, on a Tuesday in early June. 3 drop transports came down through the clouds over Seagull Lake, engines burning, and settled onto what the navigation system confidently described as level ground. The first transport landed on granite and stayed upright. The second landed on a floating bog mat, sank 18 inches, and stopped at an angle that made every soldier inside slide slowly toward the rear hatch. The third landed in 11 feet of very cold water. Subcommander Talric was on the first transport. He walked down the ramp with his ceremonial cloak, his sidearm, and a speech he had written 6 weeks earlier, and he stepped directly into knee-deep muskeg. "Report," he said, as if nothing had happened. A trooper waded past him carrying a supply crate over his head. "Sir, Transport 3 is underwater." "How far underwater?" "All of it, sir." Talric looked at the lake looked back. It was doing exactly what lakes do, which is nothing forever with total confidence. "Then we will proceed on foot," Talric said. That decision was also going to age badly. By sunrise, the Verne ground force had learned 6 things about the boundary waters, and they had learned all of them the hard way. The first thing was that the ground was not ground. It was a crust of moss and root floating on top of black water, and it held a canoe just fine, but did not care for a 900-pound gravity sled. The second thing was that the lakes were not obstacles you walked around. They were connected. Every route led to more water. If you tried to go around one lake, you found 2 more. The third thing was that the rock was slick. Wet granite, coated with lichen, took Verne armored boots and treated them like ice skates. The fourth thing was the insects. The Verne had sealed environmental suits rated for hostile atmospheres. Northern Minnesota in early June has black flies, and black flies do not attack the suit. They find the seam at the wrist. Within 2 hours, half the invasion force had stopped moving in formation and started slapping themselves. The fifth thing was the silence. There was no traffic, no machinery, no signal chatter, nothing to jam and nothing to intercept. The Verne Electronic Warfare Team activated a full communications blackout across 400 square miles at enormous cost and achieved absolutely no effect. Because there had never been a signal there in the first place. And the sixth thing, which they did not learn until much later, was that this land had never been empty. It had only ever been unoccupied by people. That is a very different thing, and the difference had teeth. Roughly 9 miles east of the landing site, a man named Dale Renner was standing on a rock ledge with a cup of instant coffee, watching 3 enormous vessels come down out of the clouds. Dale was 56 years old. He had worked for the Forest Service since he was 22, and he had spent 34 summers as a wilderness ranger in this exact stretch of country. He had pulled 17 people out of the water. He had removed more abandoned fishing line than he could measure. He had given the same permit orientation talk over 9,000 times, and he could deliver it in his sleep, which was useful, because he had occasionally done exactly that. Dale watched the transports land. He watched one of them sink. He finished his coffee. Then he took out his notebook and wrote down the time, the location, and the sentence. 3 unregistered aircraft, no permit, motorized entry, group size unknown. He did not panic. Dale Renner had spent 3 decades in a place where panic gets you killed and paperwork gets you home. He capped his pen, packed his kit, flipped his canoe up onto his shoulders, and started walking toward the trouble, because that was the job. 12 miles away, in the town of Ely, Marcy Havorson unlocked the front door of Northwind Outfitters at 5:40 in the morning and found her satellite phone already ringing. And out on the water, as the sun came up over 1,000 lakes, Subcommander Talrick ordered his exhausted, soaking, insect-bitten column to make camp on a granite shelf above Alpine Lake. They set the perimeter, they stacked the supply crates, they posted the watch. And then, as the light went out of the sky that first evening, somewhere in the dark tree line to the north, something began to howl. It started with one voice. A long, rising note that climbed out of the black spruce, held and slid down into nothing. Then a second voice answered from the west. Then a third, much closer, from a direction that the Verne perimeter had already declared secure. Private Alec dropped his ration tin. Alec was, by any honest measurement, the worst soldier in the Verne ascendancy. He had failed navigation twice. He had once saluted a fuel drum for 11 minutes. During landing drills, he had activated an emergency beacon because he thought it was a light switch. His commanding officers described him in official evaluations as loyal, willing, and best employed at a distance from anything expensive. His assignment that night was to stand beside the supply cache and touch nothing. "Sir," Alec said, "the forest is making noise at us." Subcommander Talrick was already moving. Defensive square. Now, what followed was, from a military standpoint, textbook. 60 Verne soldiers formed a hollow square on open granite with the supply crates in the center, weapons out, thermal sweeps running. Every angle covered. It was the correct response to a coordinated night assault by a numerically superior force, and Talrick executed it beautifully. Unfortunately, that is not what was happening. The wolves came to the edge of the light and stopped. 7 of them, then 9, then 11. Gray and black, and one that was nearly white, moving low along the tree line, appearing and disappearing between the trunks. Eyes catching the perimeter lamps and throwing the light back green. They did not charge, they circled. "They are probing our line," Talrick said. "Hold." They circled for 6 hours. A wolf would step out onto the open rock, stand there, and look at the Verne square with an expression of profound and patient professional interest. Then it would turn and walk back into the trees. 20 minutes later, another one would do the same thing from the opposite side. The howling never stopped for long. It moved. It came from behind them, then from the water, then from a ridge half a mile off, then from 30 yards away. Trooper Dosick, who ran the supply cache, fired a warning shot into the air at 2 in the morning. The report cracked across the lake and came back off the far shore 4 seconds later. The wolves did not leave. One of them lay down. "Sir," Peth said over the relay from the safety of orbit, "the database has a classification for these organisms. Read it. Canis lupus." Gray wolf, pack predator, coordinated hunting behavior, high endurance, communicates across long distances. Talric gripped his sidearm. Threat assessment. There was a pause. The database notes that documented attacks on humans in this region are extraordinarily rare, sir. That is not a threat assessment. It is the one I have, sir. At 4:20 in the morning. The howling stopped. At 4:50, the wolves left. They did not retreat under fire. They did not scatter. They simply stood up one by one, turned north, and walked away along the shoreline in single file, unhurried, the way a road crew leaves at the end of a shift. The Vern Square held position for another 40 minutes. Then Talric lowered his weapon, straightened his cloak, and turned to face his soldiers with the shining eyes of a man who had just decided what history was going to say about him. "We have broken them," he said. The report went up to the unbroken mandate at 6 in the morning. High Marshal Vresk read it twice. Engaged and repelled indigenous pack predator unit. Enemy force withdrew before dawn. Ground position held. No Vern casualties. Recommend commendation. Vresk set the report down. Peth. In your professional opinion, did we win that? Peth chose his words carefully, which is a habit that had kept him alive across 4 campaigns. Sir, we survived it. Whether those are the same thing may depend on the animal. At 11 that morning, the invasion of the boundary waters met Dale Renner. He came around a point of rock in a battered green canoe, paddling the way a man does when he has done it 40,000 times and no longer thinks about it. He beached the bow on the granite shelf 20 feet from a line of armored alien soldiers, stepped out, pulled the canoe up, and set his paddle across the gunnels. Nobody shot him. Later, nobody could explain why. Morning, Dale said. Talric stared. You are unarmed. I'm a ranger. Dale opened his notebook. You folks have a permit. A what? Entry permit. You need one for the boundary waters. Reserved in advance, dated, with a group leader listed. There's also a party size limit. 9 people and 4 watercraft per group. He looked past Talric at approximately 60 soldiers. You're over. Talric's translator worked through that twice and produced nothing helpful. You are being invaded, he said. I heard. Dale wrote something down. Also, motors aren't allowed in this zone, and you can't land aircraft in the wilderness, and there's a can and bottle ban. I'm going to be honest with you, you're looking at a fair number of violations here. Behind Talric, Trooper Dosick whispered to Aulic. Is this a negotiator? I think it is a very calm man, Aulic whispered back. Talric drew himself up. Do you understand that we defeated a coordinated predator force on this ground last night? Dale stopped writing. He looked at the trampled moss along the tree line. He looked at the granite shelf, the supply crates stacked in the open, the burn mark where the warning shot had gone up. He looked at the water, and then at the north shore, and he was quiet for long enough that the entire alien perimeter began to feel something they could not name. You didn't defeat them, Dale said. They withdrew. They lost interest. Dale capped his pen. That's not the same. A wolf is a professional. It shows up, it takes a look at you, it does the math, and if the math is bad, it leaves. That's not a retreat, that's a decision. He nodded toward the crates. You want to be worried about the thing that doesn't do math. Talric's jaw tightened. Explain. Can't. Dale pushed his canoe back into the water and stepped in. You've got food out in the open, no hang, no barrel, and no idea what lives here. You'll figure it out. You are giving us advice. I'm giving you a warning. There's a difference, and you'll learn that one too. He put his paddle in the water. Get a permit. The canoe slid out onto the lake and around the point and was gone. That night, the Vern perimeter was doubled. Motion sensors were placed at 40-yard intervals. The watch rotation was tightened to 2-hour shifts. Talric personally inspected the line at midnight and again at 3. Nothing came out of the trees. Nothing howled. The sensors registered nothing at all. And at first light, when Trooper Dosick walked over to open the primary supply cache, he found the alloy lid peeled back like the skin of a fruit, 41 days of rations gone. And a single set of 5-toed tracks pressed into the wet moss, walking away in a straight line without the slightest sign of hurry. Trooper Dosick was not an imaginative being. He was a quartermaster. He believed in counts, seals, and inventory, and he had never lost a single item on any world. He stood over the ruined cache for a long time before he could make himself use the relay. Sir, he said, the primary cache is gone. Talric came at a run. He looked at the peeled lid. He crouched and put his hand next to the tracks in the moss, and something in his chest went cold because the tracks were not large. They were about the size of his own palm, 5 toes. Claw marks well ahead of the pads. The pack returned, he said. Sir, the sensors did not trigger. Then the sensors failed. Sir, all 9 of them, Talric stood up. Replace the cache. Move it inside the square, post 4 guards on it. They did exactly that. The following night the second cache was opened, not smashed, opened. Something had gone underneath the crate, dug down through 8 inches of moss and root into the gap where the granite dipped, and come up through the floor of it. The guards, standing 4 feet away in full armor, had heard nothing. The night after that, the third cache was found intact. That was worse. Because the food inside had been pulled out, chewed once, spat out, and then coated in a musk so profoundly, aggressively foul that 2 soldiers had to remove their helmets and sit down. It was not damage, it was not theft, it was a statement. Everything that could not be eaten had been made permanently inedible, deliberately with care. Peth, Talric said into the relay, and his voice had lost its ceremonial edge. I need the database. Up on the unbroken mandate, Peth ran the track profile, the bite pattern, the musk chemistry, and the dig depth. The result came back in under a minute, and he read it 3 times before he spoke. Sir, classification, Gyulo. Repeat that. Gyulo, sir. Why is it said twice? Peth swallowed. Because the humans named it twice, sir. In their old scientific language, the word means glutton. They named it glutton, and then they named it glutton again, apparently for emphasis. There was a long silence on the relay. What else? Common name, Wolverine. Regional names include skunk bear, devil bear, and carcajou. Adult mass, 25 to 40 pounds, sir. Talric looked down at his own forearm. 40 pounds? Yes, sir. That is not a threat. Sir, the database also notes that this animal is regularly documented driving bears and wolf packs off their own kills. It has a molar rotated 90 degrees in the jaw, which allows it to shear frozen meat and bone. Its claws are semi-retractable. Its feet spread like snowshoes. It climbs, swims, and digs. It caches food underground and returns to it, and it routinely travels 15 to 20 miles in a single day across terrain we cannot cross at all. Talric was very quiet. Sir, Peth said, there is one more entry. Human trappers historically considered it effectively impossible to hold in a trap. It chews out of wood. It chews out of metal. How many are in this area? Peth hesitated. That is the strange part, sir. According to the human records we intercepted, there are not supposed to be any. 22 miles south, on the Alton Lake Portage. A 19-year-old canoe guide named Sam Doyle was learning about the same animal from the other direction. Sam had been guiding for exactly 1 summer. He was enthusiastic, cheerful, and completely useless at anything mechanical. He had already flipped a canoe, lost a tent pole, and packed 40 pounds of trail mix and no coffee. On his 4th morning out with a group of 6, Sam woke up to find his food packed 12 feet up a jack pine, still hanging exactly where he had hung it. And a hole chewed straight through the bottom corner. Every can was gone except one, which was sitting neatly on a rock at the base of the tree with 4 deep punctures in the lid. It was a can of beans. Well, Sam said, looking at it. High Beans, the name stuck. It stuck to the whole outfitter Grapevine within 2 days, because Marcy Havorson at Northwind put it on the message board. And by the end of that week, every canoe party from Ely to the Gunflint Trail was checking their food hang and asking whether beans had been through. Marcy had been outfitting trips for 26 years. When the military finally called her satellite phone, she was already 3 steps ahead. I've got 11 parties out there, she told the voice on the line. I want them out first. Then we talk about your equipment. Ma'am, we have a national security situation, and I've got a 19-year-old on Alton Lake with no coffee. We all have problems. Ed Nyland heard about the tracks on a Thursday. Ed was 71, retired out of the State Department of Natural Resources after 39 years, and he had spent most of his career telling people that the thing they saw was a fisher, or a badger, or an unusually confident raccoon. He had been called out for Wolverine sightings 16 times in his life. All 16 had been something else. Dale Renner paddled him out to the site personally. Ed knelt in the moss for a long time. He measured the straddle, he measured the stride. He looked at the claw marks well forward of the toe pads, and the way the animal's rear feet had come down precisely in the prints of the front ones. Which is how you cross a country like this without wasting a step. Then he sat back on his heels and said a word he had not used professionally in almost 40 years. "That's a Wolverine? You sure?" "Dale, I have never been sure." "I'm sure now." Ed touched the edge of the print. "And it's one animal." Dale looked at the ruined caches, the churned ground, the chewed sensor cable coiled in the moss like something left as a joke. One, same stride, same weight, same gait, every print. It's been working this whole area alone. Ed stood up slowly, with the sound a 71-year-old man makes when his knees have opinions. "Dale, there shouldn't be one of these here. Not anymore. They've been gone from this state for about 100 years. Every so often somebody swears they saw one come down out of Canada. Nobody ever proves it. And now," Ed looked north toward 1,000,000 acres of water and rock and nothing. "Now somebody parked a mountain of free food in the middle of the emptiest place in the lower 48, he said, and something came a very long way to find out about it. That night, Subcommander Talric made the decision that would end his career. He ordered the camp broken and moved, not 1 mile, 30. Across 4 lakes and 3 portages, hauling every crate, every sled, every soldier through terrain that had already beaten them once, in the dark. Because he had convinced himself that they were being tracked by a coordinated hostile unit that would lose them in the distance. It took 11 hours. 2 soldiers went into the water. 1 gravity sled was abandoned in a bog and is still there. By dawn, the Verne ground force stood on a bare granite dome above Knife Lake, exhausted, filthy, and 30 miles from anything that had ever bothered them. Talric allowed himself to breathe. Then Trooper Dosick walked to the edge of the rock, looked down at the wet moss on the shoreline where they had landed and stopped moving. The tracks were already there. They came up out of the water, crossed the shelf, circled the entire new camp once, and went back down to the shore. They had been made hours before the Verne arrived. Subcommander Talric did not sleep for the next 4 days. He was, in his own way, a good officer, and a good officer confronted with an impossible problem does not quit. He escalates. So he escalated, methodically, intelligently, and completely in the wrong direction, because every single one of his solutions was designed for an enemy that had a plan. First, he ordered a full thermal sweep of a 6-mile radius. His teams found 41 moose, an unknown number of beaver, 3 black bears, and a loon that got recorded as an unidentified aerial contact for 2 days before anyone corrected it. They did not find their target, because the animal was under a rock ledge, asleep, insulated by a coat of fur that frost does not stick to. Second, he ordered the supply cache suspended from a cable strung between 2 pines, 16 feet off the ground, 40 feet from either trunk. It was a genuinely excellent solution. That night the animal walked out along the cable, hand over hand, and dropped into the food. Third, he had the cable replaced with a rigid alloy bar. The animal climbed the tree, chewed through 11 inches of aerospace-grade polymer sheath, and got at the release housing. Fourth, he built a trap. This was Talric's masterpiece. A reinforced containment cell, magnetically sealed, pressure-triggered, baited with a full ration block, with 2 motion recorders covering the approach and a 4-soldier watch at 30 yards. At 3:17 in the morning, the trap triggered. The soldiers ran to it. The cell was sealed. The pressure plate had fired correctly. The magnetic lock had engaged. The bait was gone. The animal had gone in, taken the ration block, and left before the plate finished closing. And then, on the way out, it had turned around and sprayed the inside of the cell. So that the trap itself was ruined, and no Verne soldier could go within 10 feet of it for the rest of the campaign. The recorders had captured 6 seconds of usable footage. Talric watched it 11 times. A low, heavy, bear-shaped shadow with a pale stripe running down each flank, short legs, enormous feet. Moving with a rolling, unstoppable, deeply unbothered gait, like something that had never once in its life needed to hurry. "Peth," Talric said. "Count them, sir. Count how many are in the footage." There was a pause on the relay. "1, sir. Count again." "Sir, I have run it through the full analysis suite." Gate signature, mass distribution, stride length, and print depth all match a single organism, across every incident. Since the first night, that is not possible. Talric's voice cracked for the first time in 19 years of service. Peth, it has hit us at 4 separate locations across 30 miles in the same week. It defeated 9 sensors, a suspended cable, a rigid mount, and a sealed containment cell. It has taken 160 days of rations. That is a campaign. That is a unit with a rotation schedule and a supply doctrine. Sir, it is one animal that walks 20 miles a day and does not have anything else to do. 2 days later, they saw it in daylight. A Verne observation team on the ridge above Knife Lake reported a black bear on the shoreline, feeding on a deer carcass in the shallows. The bear was substantial. 240 pounds, at least. The team was recording it as a potential secondary threat when something came down off the rocks behind it. It was less than a fifth of the bear's size. It went straight in. No circling, no display, no assessment. It came in low and fast, and made a sound that the recording equipment rendered as a kind of grinding cough, and the bear, which had absolutely nothing to fear from it in any rational sense, took one look at the situation, made a decision, and left. The Wolverine climbed onto the carcass and began to eat. The Verne observation team filed a report that said, in full, apex organism displaced from food source by smaller organism. Recommend revision of threat model. Recommend revision of entire threat model. High Marshal Cordon Vresk read that report on the command deck and set it down very slowly. Peth. How much of our supply remains? 11 days, sir, if we reduce rations. And the ground force, sir. Peth pulled up the status board. Subcommander Talric has not slept. Trooper Dosick has requested reassignment to any position that does not involve food. 14 soldiers have refused to stand watch on the cache. And sir, Private Aulick has now been personally assigned to guard the cache for 6 consecutive nights. Because he is the only member of the ground force who has never once been present during an incident. Why? We do not know, sir. He stands beside it. Nothing happens. He is being treated as a good luck charm. Vresk closed his eyes. The worst soldier in my army has become our most effective defensive asset. That is the current assessment, sir. Down on the water, the humans were converging. Commander Ray Halstead had arrived out of Northern Command 4 days earlier with a plan, a mandate, and a great deal of equipment. He had lost the plan almost immediately because there is no road into the boundary waters. There is no helicopter landing zone in a federally designated wilderness. There are no motors permitted across most of it. Every rule that made the region worthless to an invading empire also made it nearly impossible for the United States military to move through in a hurry. So on the 5th day, Commander Ray Halstead stood in the parking lot of Northwind Outfitters in Ely, Minnesota, and rented 11 aluminum canoes from Marcy Havorson at the standard daily rate. Plus a damage deposit she refused to waive. "You're serious," he said. "I'm always serious about the deposit," Halstead signed. He was 48, career service, and smart enough to know when the local expert was the actual authority. "Ma'am, I need someone who knows the routes," Marcy pointed out the window. Dale Renner was standing beside his canoe with Ed Nyland, and a 19-year-old kid in a life jacket who was holding a punctured can of beans like a trophy. "You've got the ranger, you've got the biologist, and you've got the only person who's actually met the thing," Marcy said. "Take all 3. "Sam paddles better than he thinks he does." Sam looked up, startled and pleased. "Really?" "No," Marcy said. "But you'll get there." They reached the Verne position on Knife Lake at 4 in the afternoon on the 6th day, 24 canoes. Dale in the lead, Ed in the stern behind him. Halstead in the 3rd boat with his hands cramping in a way that would embarrass him for years. They came around the point in a long, quiet line, and every Verne soldier on that granite dome stood up at once. And that was the exact moment that Trooper Dosick discovered that the Verne Command Relay Module, the sealed unit that carried the campaign authorization codes and the recall protocol for the entire ground force, was no longer in its case. There was a hole chewed through the side of the case. There were 5-toed tracks leading away from it, down the rock, into the water, and gone. High Marshal Cordon Vresk came down himself. The transport landed on the only piece of flat granite wide enough to take it, and Vresk walked down the ramp in full command dress, flanked by his personal guard, onto a wilderness shoreline in northern Minnesota, and stopped. He had expected to see an army under pressure, What he saw was worse. His soldiers were thin. Their armor was scratched, water-stained, and in 3 cases missing pieces that had been left in bogs. Somebody had strung a clothesline between 2 spruce trees. Sub-Commander Talric was sitting on a supply crate with a printout of 6 seconds of footage in his hands, looking at it the way people look at a photograph of somebody they have lost. Trooper Dosick was standing beside an empty case with a hole in it, and he had been standing there for 2 hours. And Private Aulick was asleep, sitting upright beside the last cache, which was untouched. Vresk took all of it in. Sub-Commander Talric stood. "Hi, Marshal. Report." "Sir," Talric's voice was steady, which was its own kind of heroism. "We hold this ground. We have taken no casualties. We defeated a coordinated pack unit on our first night." He stopped. "And we have lost the command relay module." "To whom?" Talric did not answer. "Sub-Commander." "To whom?" "To an animal that weighs approximately 35 pounds, sir." The wind came off Knife Lake and moved through the pines and did not care about any of it. "Sir," Peth said quietly over the relay, "I would like the record to show that I did recommend a wider survey." "Noted," Vresk said. "Disregarded." "Continue." At that moment, 20 canoes came around the point. Dale Renner beached his bow on the granite, stepped out, pulled the canoe up, and set his paddle across the gunnels, exactly as he had 6 days earlier. He walked up the rock with his notebook already open. "Afternoon," he said. "You're still over on group size." Vresk turned. "You are the human who spoke to my officer, Dale Renner." "Forest Service." He nodded past him. "That's Ed Nyland, retired DNR. That's Commander Ray Halstead, and he's here on behalf of the United States. And that's Sam." "Sam's the one who named it." Vresk looked at the 19-year-old. "Named what?" "Beans," Sam said. The translator held that for 4 full seconds. "You have named it," Vresk said slowly. "Beans. He stole my food bag and left me 1 can. It felt polite." Sam shrugged. "I figured he earned a name." Ed Nyland stepped forward with a folded topographic map and spread it out on a crate. "You want to know what happened to you?" he said. "I'll tell you, and then you can decide if you believe it." He tapped the map. "That's your first camp, that's your second, that's here. You covered about 30 miles. That's a long way for you, because you're carrying 900-pound sleds across ground that eats them." He drew his finger in one unbroken line. "For this animal, that's 4 days of ordinary living. Wolverines cover ground like that all the time. It didn't chase you. It just kept walking the way it always walks, and you kept setting up dinner in front of it." Talric stared at the map. "It was not pursuing us. Son, it doesn't know what you are." Ed folded his hands. "It doesn't know you're an empire. It doesn't know you've got warships. All it knows is that a large amount of food showed up in its country and kept moving around, and it's not the kind of animal that lets that go." "There is no coordination," Talric said. "There's one of him. There cannot be one." "There's one of him," Ed repeated. "Same prints, same stride every time. He's been alone out here his whole life. That's what they do. They walk and they eat and they bury what's left and they don't quit. There's not a committee. There's not a plan. There's just an animal that never once considered stopping." Vresk turned to Commander Ray Halstead. "You are the military authority here." "I am." "Then I will address you." Vresk drew himself up. "Deliver the organism. Return our command relay. In exchange, I will withdraw." Halstead looked at him for a long moment. "Sir," he said, "I want to be respectful, so I'm going to say this plainly. I cannot deliver that animal to you. Not because I won't, because I can't. Nobody can. We've had people trying to get reliable proof of one of these in this state for 100 years, and we've got nothing but arguments and bad photographs." He gestured out at the water. "You're asking me to hand you the one thing in this country that has never been handed to anybody. Then give me its command structure. It doesn't have one. Every force has a command structure." "It's not a force." Dale closed his notebook. "That's the part you keep tripping on. You came here looking for an enemy, and what you found is a neighbor with a very poor sense of boundaries." Vresk stood on the granite in the falling light, and for the first time in his career, could find nothing in his training that applied. "Then how does it end?" "Same way it ends for everybody out here," Dale said. "You hang your food properly, you keep a clean camp, you stop leaving your gear where it can be reached. And you accept that this place was never going to belong to you." He put the notebook in his pocket. "And you go home." It took 2 more days. The relay module was found by Ed Nyland, 300 yards from the camp. Buried under 8 inches of moss and a flat slab of granite in the way that Wolverines have cached food for as long as there have been Wolverines. It had been chewed, it still worked. Verne Engineering was, in the end, extremely good at everything except this. Subcommander Talric requested permission to leave last. It was granted. Trooper Dosick requested, formally and in writing, that his service record note that no supply officer in the history of the Ascendancy had ever faced comparable conditions. Vresk approved it and added a line of his own. This officer was defeated by an opponent that outranked us all in commitment. And Private Aulick, who had guarded the last cache for 9 straight nights without a single incident, was asked, on the ramp, why he thought that was. Aulick considered the question with the deep, honest seriousness of somebody who has never once been asked for his opinion. "I did not have any food, sir," he said. "I ate mine on the first day. I was not supposed to. I have been standing next to an empty box for 9 nights. There was a very long silence. "Peth," Vresk said, "note that in the report. All of it, sir, all of it. Someone in the next century should know exactly how this happened." The Verne Ascendancy lifted off the boundary waters at sunrise on the 8th day, and the loons on Knife Lake called after them the whole way up. The Verne High Assembly reviewed the Northern Shield campaign 11 weeks later. High Marshal Cordon Vresk stood before them and did not make excuses, which is the only reason he kept his rank. "You selected a landing site with no population," the first speaker said. "I did. No roads, no towns. No defenses. Correct. And you withdrew?" "I did." "Why?" Vresk had spent 11 weeks preparing an answer, and in the end he gave the short one. "Because there was nothing there to conquer," he said. "You cannot occupy a place that has no infrastructure. There is nothing to seize. There is no capital, no grid, no supply chain, no leadership. Every advantage we brought required something to push against, and that land gave us nothing to push against at all. It simply absorbed us. And while it was absorbing us, one animal took our food. One animal, one speaker, 35 pounds. It defeated 9 sensors, 2 suspended caches, 1 containment cell, and a command relay module rated to survive orbital re-entry. It never announced itself. It never negotiated. It never stopped. The assembly reviewed the 6 seconds of footage, twice. The final classification was entered into the Verne Threat Registry the following month, and it was the first of its kind in 400 years. Earth was not listed as a military power. It was listed under a new heading, Attritional Wilderness Hazard. The advisory beneath it read, "Do not land in unoccupied terrain. Unoccupied does not mean undefended. Do not assume water is ground. Do not store food above the surface, below the surface, in a sealed container, in a suspended container, or anywhere within 20 miles of a 5-toed track. Do not attempt to establish a perimeter against an organism that does not recognize perimeters. And do not, under any circumstances, engage the species designated Gyulo. A junior clerk added a footnote 3 years later, and nobody ever removed it. Local designation, beans. Back on Earth, things went back to normal remarkably fast, which is the most human part of the entire story. Commander Ray Halstead filed a report that was classified for 18 months, and then quietly released with almost nothing removed. Because nobody at any level of government could figure out how to make it sound serious. He returned the 11 canoes to Marcy Havorson personally. 2 had scratches. She kept the deposit. Northwind Outfitters had its best season in 26 years. Marcy put a hand-painted sign above the register that read, "Hang your food. You are not special. It is still there." Ed Nyland published a paper. It was 7 pages long, extremely dry, and contained the best documented Wolverine track record in the history of the state. He was 71 years old, and he told everyone who asked that he had waited 39 years to write it and would have waited 39 more. Sam Doyle kept guiding. He got better. He kept the punctured can of beans on the shelf above his bunk, and every group he took out for the next 15 years heard the story on the second night, at the fire. And every single one of them asked the same question. Did you ever see him again? The answer was no. Nobody did. Not Dale, not Ed, not the state, not the federal survey teams that went in afterward with grids and recorders and a budget. They found tracks that autumn, and then the snow came, and then there was nothing. The animal had done what Wolverines have always done, which is walk north into a country with no edges and keep going. Ed Nyland was asked about it at a public talk in Grand Marais a few years before he passed. A woman in the third row wanted to know whether it bothered him, never getting proof he could hold. Ed thought about it. "No," he said. "It was never ours to keep. That's what people don't understand about this place. You don't own the boundary waters. You visit it and it lets you, and then you leave." He smiled. "An empire came here with warships and couldn't hold it for 8 days. What made us think we could hold one animal?" Dale Renner retired the following spring, after 39 summers. On his last day, he paddled out to Seagull Lake alone, sat on the same rock ledge where he had watched 3 warships come down out of the clouds, and drank a cup of instant coffee. Then he paddled back, and he handed his old brass ranger compass to a 24-year-old guide named Sam Doyle, who by then had a permit book of his own. "It's dented," Dale said. "Why? Because it's been used." He picked up his pack. "Look, you're going to spend your whole career explaining rules to people who think the rules are for somebody else. Hang the food. Pack it out, keep the party small, and when they ask you why, don't tell them about the aliens." Sam laughed. "What do I tell them? Tell them there's something out there that's better at this than any of us," Dale said, "and it was here first and it doesn't care who you are." He shouldered the pack. "That's the whole orientation. Everything else is paperwork." He walked up the landing, and he did not look back, because he had already looked at that water for 39 years, and he knew exactly what it looked like. If you made it this far, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment. Was it the wolf night, was it the trap, or was it Private Alec and his empty box? And share this one with somebody who needs to hear that the toughest thing in the woods usually weighs about 35 pounds, and does not know it is supposed to lose. Because the Verne Ascendancy came to Earth with warships, thermal sweeps, and 400 years of doctrine, and they lost to a place with no roads and an animal with no plan. They escaped the wolves because wolves do the math. They never escaped the Wolverine because the Wolverine never learned how.